Good afternoon, everybody. We're still waiting for everybody to come through. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. Just a couple more people to come through, and then we'll be starting. Okay, I think everybody who was in the lobby is now through, so I think we can start. So welcome to this webinar. My name is Emmanuel Gianquitto. I'm the head of consultancy and training at ChamberCustoms, and I have the pleasure of chairing this session today on rules of origin and preference. So I'm joined by three people. I can see two. I hope that Paul is back in the room. I'm joined by Paul Wrighting, who's the International Trade Manager at the British Chamber of Commerce, and I'm joined by Gavin O and Dan Browne from the policy team at the Department for Business and Trade. So what we'll be doing today, we'll be talking through a few different things. Paul will give us some information on the way in which we can claim preference. Then we'll go into more of the mechanics of origin and how it works. We will have space for questions at the end. So for that, I would like to invite you to use the Q&A panel that you will find in Teams rather than the chat. It's a lot easier for us if you use the Q&A panel. And your microphones should already be on mute. We are in webinar mode. And so that's going to be the easiest way to ask questions. We are recording this session, so I'm just informing you of that. We will make the recording available later, and we will also make a copy of the slides available to you all if you wish. So here's Paul, very on time, perfect. And so I think I would like to open with the first question, and that is, how do we claim preference? What do we have to do?
Thank you, Emmanuel, and hello to everybody. Yeah, sorry about the slight panic there of me disappearing. The webinar decided that I was going to be an attendee rather than a presenter, so I disappeared off your screens for a moment. So today we're going to talk about claiming preference, and our colleagues from DBT are going to give you some real insight into how the rules of origin work. So when we're talking about origin, we have to remember there are two types of origin. There are preferential origin and non-preferential origin, and they have different rules. So if we start with the non-preferential origin, these relate to the UK certificates of origin issued by Chambers of Commerce. They don't give you any reduction in tariffs. They're just required by some countries to get the goods into the country or related to letters of credit, etc. An origin is basically based on the last economically justified process. So it's fairly straightforward. But today we're going to be talking about preferential origin, and that is related to specific trade agreements. So the rules vary not only per commodity, but also per agreement. So you do, when you want to check the preferential origin, you need to go to the individual trade agreement, look up the commodity code, and make sure that works. Make sure that you're using the right rules to decide whether the goods are of UK origin or not. And our colleagues from DBT are going to go through that in some detail. There are two main ways of claiming preference, depending on the trade agreement. Usually, the most usual way is to use an EUR1 form. These can be got from your local Chamber of Commerce or HMRC, or some of the newer trade agreements have invoice declaration as a main way of claiming preference. Here, you just have to write on an agreed statement usually onto the invoice to show how to claim origin. There is a third method which can be used by your importer, and that's called importer's knowledge. That's fairly new, and it does require that the importer has an intimate knowledge of the business that they're claiming preference for. So it'd usually be a sister company or something like that. But we're not really going to talk about that today. Okay, so as I said, the EUR1 form can be obtained from your local chamber or HMRC, and it is fairly straightforward to complete. So there are various boxes, and it starts off, box 1. So the goods must be leaving from the UK. So that's really important. You can't complete this can't complete an EUR1 on behalf of goods leaving from another country. The goods must be departing from the UK. It can be an overseas company claiming processing the EUR1, but the goods must be leaving the UK. Box 2 is the country of destination. Box 3, the consignee. It's actually not mandatory, but is recommended that you put that in there. It can just be the country of destination. Box 4 is the origin of goods, and now that is actually pre-printed as UK. So you'll see that to use an EUR1, the goods must be of UK origin. Boxes 5 and 6, really straightforward. Transport details, leave blank, don't complete, it'll only confuse the issue. Box 7 is duplicate, replacement, or issued retrospectively. Again, your chamber can advise when to use those appropriate boxes, and you're going to put in things like the weight, invoice number, etc. The next really important bit is the declaration that has to be made by the exporter. So you are going to make a statement that the goods were manufactured either by yourselves or manufactured by another supplier in the UK. There is a third option which says that the goods are being exported in the same state they were imported. This can only be used in very specific circumstances. That third declaration is very misleading. It caused a lot of UK companies to think they can claim preference on non-UK origin goods when that's not the case. So bear that in mind. You will also need to put a 4-figure tariff classification on the EUR1 as part of the declaration. And by signing the EUR1 or the invoice declaration, you are declaring that the goods are originating and that you hold evidence that those goods actually qualify as UK origin. And if that turns out to be incorrect, then actually your importer is going to be very upset because they're going to end up paying duties and possibly penalties because of the mistake you made. So it's really important that you're confident that the goods qualify when you make that statement. If you're declaring origin via an invoice declaration, then check the wording per the specific trade agreement, because again, like the rules of origin, they do vary per agreement. So you do need to make sure you're using the right paperwork, quoting the right code. And again, if you if you declare incorrectly that the goods are of UK origin, you can still be held liable if it turns out they're not. Chambers are there to offer you help and advice. So if you need anything, give them a shout and they will clarify what needs to be done. Also, the guidance on .gov is pretty good these days, so check that out as well. Okay, Emmanuel, back to you.
Let's see, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it working? Great.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Paul. That was a quick introduction on basically how we can prove that goods leaving the UK are of UK preferential origin, and that allows the importer to claim a reduced tariff on the other side. And that's great. So there wasn't there was a question. So is there a presentation for that? I suppose that was just your initial introduction to how we can claim it. So what we would like to do now is to move into more of the mechanics of how origin works, because there are different scenarios when different countries are involved, and I think some of the traders, especially the traders we deal with, sometimes they get confused. So I would like to go to Gavin and Dan for some more insight on how this works. When can origin be claimed? How does it work when different countries are involved in the trade?
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. And Paul, that was a really useful introduction on how to claim preference. I am aware that we do have a present. There we go. Perfect timing, Heidi. Thank you. Can I just quickly check that people can see that? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Cool. So yeah, Paul, as you say, encouraging encouraging UK businesses to be able to utilize the hard-won preferences of our FTAs is really important to us in DBT. So yeah, Paul, is a really useful run through. Thank you. And by the same token, myself and Dan are really pleased to be able to give like a quick introduction to the sometimes kind of mystifying world of rules of origin, and hopefully this session kind of give you the tools and the knowledge to kind of help you to apply these rules. But yeah, I think the plan for this quick presentation is to give an overview of what kind of rules of origin are and kind of why they're important, and then we'll kind of go on to discuss, as Emmanuel alludes to, the kind of common types of rules of origin found in the UK's free trade agreements. I will then pass over to my colleague Dan for the somewhat unenviable task of explaining the concept of accumulation. And also, I think he's going to give a quick introduction to the transit requirements of the UK's FTAs, I think using the example of the recently agreed FTA with New Zealand. Yes, so the presentation will be shared after the webinar, I believe. There's some useful links there that we can kind of go through. But yeah, I hope that all has you on the edge of your seats. And yeah, I believe there'll be a bit of time for a question answer session at the end. So happy to kind of answer any questions there, or point you in the direction of some kind of useful resources. So let's just quickly start with the basics. So on the right there of this slide, in the red box, essentially rules of origin are in every free trade agreement, and they're the criteria which essentially determine the kind of economic nationality of a good, which therefore means if the product is eligible or not for preferential rates under a free trade agreement. So I guess in kind of simpler terms, rules of origin answers the question, where is the product from? What is the economic kind of nationality of the product? And understanding these rules of origin is essential for businesses who are looking to kind of export to a foreign market, and also import foreign goods to the domestic market. I think by knowing the rules, traders stand to benefit from preferential trade agreements, which are available under a free trade agreement, and then also avoid kind of associated tariffs and costs with trading outside of one. So in order, as kind of Paul alluded to, in order to qualify for zero tariffs when exporting to a country the UK has an FTA with, you'll need to prove that your goods originate in the United Kingdom. So I guess kind of in general, there are two ways in which your goods can kind of deem to have met the rules of origin in an FTA. So the first way would be kind of wholly obtained in the UK. So that is the first bullet point there. And then the goods being produced in the UK using solely originating materials, which is the second bullet point. As I'll explain briefly in the next slide, these options kind of cover goods which are completely obtained in the United Kingdom or comprised kind of entirely of originating inputs. And then the second way is if the goods use non-originating materials in a way that satisfies the PSR, which stands for the product-specific rule. So this means that non-originating inputs are allowed for certain products under an FTA. So only some products under an FTA, as long as they meet that relevant kind of product-specific rule. But yeah, as I said, I'll cover more detail in the next couple of slides. I think quickly, just before we move on, in order to kind of, Paul also alluded to this earlier, but I'll just touch on it again because it's super important. In order to kind of ensure that you can see the relevant rule for your product, you must also find the correct product code. So every product which has kind of ever been conceived or near enough is categorized under the harmonized system, or the HS, and has been assigned a specific product code. And at the top link there on this slide, this is where you can go to find the correct product code. And then all of these product codes are then listed in the FTA, where you can find the specific PSR for that product code. So I hope that all makes sense. Heidi, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is on wholly obtained goods. So the easiest, it's kind of the easiest and one of the most common types of a product-specific rule is wholly obtained. So essentially, wholly obtained means that the product has been produced entirely in the UK or the other party and doesn't include any non-originating inputs in its production at all. So common types of non-originating products kind of tend to be agricultural goods, so that would be stuff like crops, and then animals that have been born and raised in that country, so the UK. Or I guess it seems pumpkins from the slide, and a somewhat late reference to Halloween. So as I kind of said earlier, pumpkins, that's their HS code there. So their HS code is 0709. And for wholly obtained, it's kind of impossible to import a non-originating pumpkin, so let's say from Canada, and then to export that pumpkin under our FTA with Serbia, for example, and consider that pumpkin UK originating. It's still a pumpkin from Canada, so it can't gain preference if it's been exported to Serbia under the UK-Serbia agreement. So yeah, for kind of the purposes of determining originating status, most agricultural goods, I guess, such as pumpkins, must be wholly obtained in the UK. And then other kind of classic examples of wholly obtained goods are so mineral products extracted kind of from the soil or sometimes the seabed of a party, so the UK. And there's I think on the slide there, there's a list of common wholly obtained processed products, just for reference there. And then it's also quickly worth mentioning that if a good is entirely comprised of originating inputs, so if a good is made from originating inputs, then it too will also be considered originating. So an example of this would be, I think, a mirror which has UK originating glass and has a UK originating wooden frame. If all the inputs are UK originating, then the final mirror itself will also be originating. So yeah, I think, or I hope at this stage, everything is kind of common sense in terms of wholly obtained. Sorry, Heidi, could you go to the next slide, please? Cool. So this is kind of where it gets a little bit more complicated. This slide covers where non-originating materials are used in the production of a final product. So these non-originating materials must be substantially processed to meet the relevant product-specific rule. So in this case, substantial processing involves the non-originating good to be processed so that it changes classification under the HS system we briefly touched on earlier. So that means that the new good the product has a new product code under the HS system. So this change in classification can happen at various levels, and it kind of depends product to product on what the FTA requires the processing to be on a non-originating product in order to make it originating. So the example on the slide is an example of a CTH rule, which stands for change in tariff heading. And as it says below there, all non-originating materials used in the production of the final product must have undergone a change to the 4-digit level or tariff heading of the HS code. And then once that change has happened, the product can then be considered UK originating. So the example that's used is a UK business imports cocoa beans of HS code 1801. So these cocoa beans are from Argentina. So, and then the business then processes the beans into cocoa powder, and the heading of cocoa powder is 1806. So that's changed tariff heading. So the beans have now been processed enough to meet that CTH rule under, in this case, the UK EU TCA, and they can then Bob's your uncle can then be exported to France under the UK UTCA and be considered UK originating. I hope that all makes sense so far. I think, the essence of these rules is to kind of, at once kind of reflect the global kind of complexity of supply chains, but also kind of considering that the product needs to be originating in either the UK or the partner country in order to gain preference under that agreement. Sorry, Dan, I'm aware I've spoke for quite a while there. So yeah, I will not hog the limelight anymore, and I'll pass over to you to explain. I think we're going to talk about some more PSRs as well as kind of accumulation and direct transport requirements. So Dan, over to you.
Cheers, Gavin. Limelight greatly appreciated. Hope everyone is having a great day and is finding this webinar informative and useful. Just to note that Gavin and I are very aware that rules of origin policy is quite intricate and not the most easy to understand. So hopefully we're making it a bit more understandable for you. And we'll keep building on that now with a couple of slides based on accumulation and another product specific rule called regional value content in the context of the UK-New Zealand trade agreement, which I'm involved with myself. We're going to use the specific example of an agricultural sprayer, which can be found as HS code 842441. I couldn't find an image of a sprayer, so you've got a tractor there instead. So the hypothetical example is that we're looking to send this sprayer from the UK to New Zealand and access tariff preference there. So if I'll draw your attention to the top left of the screen, you can see that under the UK-New Zealand agreement, these agricultural sprayers can count as originating an access tariff preference by either fulfilling a regional value content rule, an RVC, of 40%, or a change in tariff subheading rule. That's similar to what Gavin has just spoken about there, but that was about tariff heading. And we're going to be speaking also about accumulation. Accumulation is a common provision in most FTAs, so you'll find it in most of the UK's FTAs with partner countries. So we're going to focus here specifically on how the UK exporter working on the agricultural sprayer can meet the RVC rule, not the CTSH rule, while accumulating originating materials from New Zealand into their products. So to start with, an RVC. What is an RVC? An RVC allows for the incorporation of materials and inputs from countries other than the UK. Sorry, I'll start over that. I've tripped over my words. And an RVC allows for the incorporation of materials and inputs from countries other than the UK and the trading partner, in this instance, New Zealand, up to a certain percentage of the total value of the good. To calculate the product's RVC, basically producers need to determine the total value of the good that they're producing based on the costs as determined within the rules of origin chapter of the trade agreement that we're looking at. So I'm going to direct you to the bottom right hand corner here. That's a link to the relevant article of the UK-New Zealand agreement on how you can calculate an RVC when exporting to New Zealand. So basically the producer of the agricultural sprayer needs to work out the total value of the good and how much of that value comes from originating materials, that's materials from the UK and New Zealand, and how much comes from other countries outside of those two, so from France, from the US, Japan, whoever. So we're going to look at how accumulation can help you to meet this RVC rule. So I'll direct your attention to the bottom left corner of the slide there on accumulation. What does accumulation mean? Basically, it means that the trading partner of the trade agreement, it means that you can take materials in those countries and count them as originating materials in your exports to that country. I hope that's clear, so I'll just kind of simplify it once more. Basically, anything that counts as originating in New Zealand also counts as originating in the UK when you are exporting from the UK to New Zealand using the trade agreement. So basically, what does that mean? So the producer of the sprayer can import a range of things from New Zealand and count them as originating in their exports back to New Zealand. You can look at that screw there on the slides that can be found as HS code 842490. parts, and those will count as originating when plugged into this sprayer. It will count towards the RVC when you're using that rule to claim preference. An important thing to add to this as well is that you can also accumulate the processing that is done on non-originating materials in New Zealand when you are exporting your sprayer and other goods back to New Zealand. So what does this mean? So let's say hypothetically that that in New Zealand they have imported some kind of material from another country, let's say Japan, which is going to be used in the sprayer that you're exporting back to New Zealand. Let's say they've done some processing on it to make it suitable for some casing on this sprayer. Even if that processing is not enough to mean that that material counts as originating in itself in the agreement, it's not enough to be counted as originating material from New Zealand. The processing that was done to make it suitable to be casing can be accumulated under the agreement. And the producer of that material, the processor who is doing that work, will be able to provide proof for that when you're claiming preference. So you've got lots of originating materials from New Zealand that you're able to use in your agricultural sprayer, but then the producer of the sprayer in the UK is also importing a number of other goods from other countries that will go into this sprayer. So you can see the outline of France towards the top there. You can import any kinds of materials for input into the sprayer, but these will not count as originating under the agreement because they're not from the UK and they're not from New Zealand. So currently, what we're looking at here, we've got a mixture of originating materials and non-originating materials in the sprayer. So as we said before, the producer needs to work out whether he's met the RVC rule, what percentage of the good counts as a originating value and what percentage counts as non-originating value. So let's say, for example, the total value of the good is £1,600, £1,600, and let's say that £500 of that value comes from the UK. And £400 of that comes from New Zealand. That means a total of £900 counts as originating value. When using the build up or build down method of calculating regional value content as specified in the link in the bottom right down there, you'll find that the RVC of the product is 56.25%. This is above the RVC requirement of RVC 40, and therefore the good counts as originating under the terms of the UK-New Zealand agreement. There's sufficient value in that good, which comes from the UK and New Zealand together, so that the good meets its PSR of RVC 40. I hope that's clear. I'm definitely happy to answer any questions in the Q&A on this at the end. But basically, accumulation is a very modern and common provision in FTAs to basically make it a bit easier for you to meet the product specific rules and access preferential tariff treatment in the agreement. It's designed to basically build your supply chains and make it trade facilitative. Heidi, please can you go to the next slide? Perfect, thank you very much. So one common question that policy officials like Gavin and I experience is about how do you ship your goods? How do you send them from the UK to the place that you're looking to export to? So we're going to continue in the example of New Zealand here. So under the UK-New Zealand agreement, if you ship your good, your agricultural sprayer or what have you, to New Zealand directly, it goes straight there. It doesn't stop off anywhere, and it doesn't go through any other territory or any other country, no free ports. It will access preferential tariff treatment. It will remain eligible for zero tariffs if it goes straight from the UK to New Zealand non-stop, no problem. If this is not the case, then don't panic, it's not the end of the world, because the goods can be transported through other countries, including via free ports, on the way to New Zealand, if certain criteria is met. And you can see these on the slide now under points A and B, and I'll just summarize them. So basically, even if your good goes through other countries on the way to New Zealand, let's say it stops through a free port like Hong Kong, or it goes through Australia, what have you, provided it doesn't undergo any further production or operation, it should still receive preferential tariff treatment. There are a list of things that can happen when your good is going through other countries or territories, and these are specified here. So I'm just going to pick one out right now. Labeling. If my agricultural sprayer is labeled, then that's no problem. That doesn't count as a production that's going to add to the good and basically change it into something else. It can also be repacked, stored, and the consignment of the sprayer can be split as well, if it's split off from a consignment of other things when it's in transit. So these are the set of permissible activities that can happen when the good is in transit. However, this leads me to the second point. The good must not be released into free circulation when it's in transit, whether or not any of these activities listed in A happens. It cannot be released into free circulation. So what does that mean exactly? You'll find a nice little definition there, some guidance. Basically, it means that the good has cleared customs, applicable duties have been paid, and the good is available for use in a domestic market. Basically, the good needs to remain under customs control when it's in transit from the UK to New Zealand, when it's going through other countries or territories. If your good is going through anywhere in transit on the way to New Zealand, you may be asked to provide proof. Sorry, the importer may be asked to provide proof when the good does arrive to prove that it did not get released into free circulation or any further production has happened. Basically, provisions like this are designed to stop other countries from basically having their goods get preferential tariff treatment through the UK's FTA with another trading partner, so other goods can't sneak through there and then basically get preferential tariff treatment, acting as British goods when they are not. So that's why there's a list of specific things that can happen through when goods are in transit, basically because those are not sufficient to transform the product, basically, and turn it into something else. I hope that is clear as well. Definitely happy to answer any questions here. I believe that takes us to the end of the presentation. So hand back to Heidi, and yeah, Gavin and I are happy to answer any questions that people might have. Thanks,
That's
Heidi.
great. That's great. Thank you very much for that. I think it was very clear, very interesting. And I think that you touched on accumulation, which is probably the biggest headache that traders get. I mean, we get at ChamberCustoms a lot of questions about that as well, and I found that very interesting. I also found quite interesting what you said about the goods should not be in free circulation in another country to qualify. I think this has tripped up a lot of our customers. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned the goods have to be under customs supervision, which is great. Does customs warehousing class as a way that the goods can stay under customs supervision without being imported into free circulation?
Something that I'll say to that, Emmanuel, and what I wanted to add for both slides is that traders, people on this call, should basically make sure that they're consulting the relevant trade agreement of the country they're exporting to, because the provisions will be slightly different in each trade agreement. What's common in New Zealand, what's there in New Zealand will not necessarily be common across other FTAs. So basically, people shouldn't assume it's the same rule set across all agreements. You need to go into the online guidance for all FTAs and basically make sure you know what you're doing in transit. So the transit requirements will be different in New Zealand to other FTAs.
That's a brilliant clarification. I think that's really, really important. Paul, I think your hand is up. Did you want to ask, say, add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick comment, because accumulation catches people out with the UK-EU trade agreement. So people assume that if something's come from France and is then sent back to France, that it would qualify under the agreement. But of course, it would only qualify when it came into the UK. On the way back, it is not UK origin, so it wouldn't count. Obviously, if it was processed in the UK into another machine, then at that point, it could be accumulated and treated as UK origin. So we've found again that that's caught a lot of people out. A lot of people are importing stuff as warehousing it and then sending it out. And again, your point about perhaps putting it into a customs warehouse rather than importing it into free circulation is one way of mitigating those double duties that you can end up paying. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, we very often in a very simple way, we say you can only claim preference once. It's a simple approach, but it's like a rule that we keep in mind when we do declarations. That's great, thank you. I'm just wondering if we have any questions coming from the floor, if anybody would like to add questions to the Q&A. And fine. One of the things you mentioned whilst we wait, I think Heidi's sorting that out. You mentioned about the 4 digits and the 6 digits. What is the important thing? I think, Paul, you mentioned that the 4-digit HS code, like the first 4 digits of the HS code had to be quoted on the UR1, but then what does the trader need to know about that?
Well, yeah, on the EUR1, usually you have to quote the 4-digit code. If you forget it, places like Mexico will instantly reject your EUR1. In terms of the rules, then the rules are usually at a 6-digit code, so that's why I think Gavin or Dan was referring to the 6-digit code, because that's the level the rules apply at rather than the 4-digit.
Great. And the other thing to ask you, Paul, was about you said that there are 2 ways to claim a preference. One is to obtaining an UR1, and one is to, if the agreement allows, to put an invoice declaration. What do people get caught out with both? I mean, there must be pros and cons of each approach. What would you say?
Well, the EUR1 being a standard form, I'll put a link in the chat to the guidance. The HMRC guidance is very good on that, so it's really easy. And again, I should have said when I was talking about the rules of origin that if you look up the UK trade tariff for the goods you're trying to export, then actually they have a good link there to the rules of origin, which you can then filter by country as well. So that's really useful to have a link to the UK trade tariff. So yeah, origin declaration, obviously you don't have to pay for, so that's good. It's self-declared, which is also good, apart from the fact that if you don't know what you're doing, you may get it wrong. So actually, at least if there's a EUR1 that's been checked by your chamber, you're getting an independent party to look over it and give you some guidance. In terms of origin declarations, we will later in the early next year, I guess, I can say probably won't be later this year now. Early next year, we're going to be launching something called Genesis, which is a project the BCC has been working on with the International Chamber of Commerce, and it will allow exporters to ask their chamber to check the origin for them and make sure that they've done the origin correct calculation, so that they know that they're not misleading their importers.
Great, thanks for that. Dan, you wanted to say something, and then I'm finally seeing the question. Thank you very much. Dan, you're still muted.
Sorry, 3 years after pandemic, still can't get the hand of unmuting. Yeah, I just want to add a clarification on the HS codes and PSRs and where to find them. So on the slides that will be circulated afterwards, the first slide that we looked at had a number of helpful links. So I wanted to clarify that traders can find the product-specific rules, the PSRs, for their products in different annexes of the FTAs that we have with other countries. So, for example, the UK-New Zealand agreement, I think it's Annex 3A, contains a list of the product-specific rules in that agreement. These can be found not just in the FTA documents themselves, but also in origin reference documents, which I believe are covered on the slides that will be circulated on slide 2. And to note on the HS codes themselves, basically, it will be different in each FTA, but goods can either be specified in the PSR schedule, the list of PSRs, at either the chapter level, which is 2 digits, so maybe just 01, 02, 03, etc. At the 4-digit level, that's the tariff heading that Gavin talked about, so 4 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, or at the subheading level. So basically, the way that I look at it, which may be helpful for others, is that basically, if goods are defined at the chapter level, just 2 digits, it's basically a very broad umbrella. And often in the UK's FTAs, you'll find basically a single product specific rule applying to a whole chapter of goods. So basically you may have like chapter 50. I can't remember off the top of my head what that is, but if you have a rule, if you just have 50 and then nothing else in that list of product specific rules, it means that that PSR that is defined for 50 applies to all subheadings that would fall under chapter 50. Everything possible that is in chapter 50 has that one rule. The same thing can then be said if it's chapter 50 and then 5012. That means that all 6-digit subheadings falling under that tariff heading will have the same PSR. And then when you get to the six digits, the subheading, that's basically the most granular detail you can get at all in a PSR schedule. So you should basically look at you should basically look out in the PSR schedule at what level your good is defined at, because it may be that you don't see the exact good that you're looking for, like an agricultural sprayer, in the PSR schedule. It may be that it's defined under a broader umbrella of something else.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, to add a tiny bit of extra information on that, if that is a bit confusing, you can always use basically the tariff find, the online tool, the trade tariff tool that's specified on the slides that are going to be sent round, which Gavin showed earlier, where you can basically enter either the name of your product or the HS code if you know it, and then you can find it there, and you can basically filter for the different countries you're looking at. So for New Zealand, you'll be able to find the PSR for your agricultural sprayer or the HS code for that product on that online tool. I hope that makes sense. Gavin's got his hand up as well.
Gavin, go for it. And then I now have all the questions that have been coming through. I had a blip and they disappeared from my screen, but they're back.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. I think just kind of reading the questions, I think it's important just to kind of clarify. I think there's a few things we can kind of advise businesses to do. I think as Dan has kind of alluded to, it is very important to read the terms of the FTA itself. I think, you know, in the online guidance the HMRC have provided for each FTA, it's quite hard, you know, to get all the nuance of that agreement into the online guidance. And I think if businesses can make sure to look at the text of the FTA, I think that will answer like quite a lot of questions that are had. It is also possible in terms of a case where the business can't ascertain whether a product that they're using or the product itself is originating. The business can apply for an advanced origin ruling through HMRC, where that the HMRC will make a decision on a case-by-case basis based off information that's provided, and that has been really helpful in my experience. You know, because as we've kind of discussed rules of origin, and you know, the nitty-gritty kind of detail of tariff subheadings and headings can be very complex. And I think if there is kind of an understand, if there's not like a kind of understanding of what's in the FTA, and the rules that are there, an advanced origin ruling is something that they can be recommended, and it has been useful in my experience. Let me just stop there, Dan. I know you've got your hand back up. It's like musical chairs in here, so on you go.
Yeah, sorry, I can just see there's a question specifically for me in the chat. I'm going to read it out. Is there a prescribed form of wording / template for a non-alteration declaration / non-manipulation certificate? First of all, sorry to be boring and repeat myself, but you'll need to check each individual FTA to see if there is a prescribed format. But I'm going to talk from the perspective of New Zealand, just because that's what we talked about in the presentation today. So as I mentioned, the customs authority of the importing party, so New Zealand, may request basically that the importer provides evidence of compliance with the non-alteration article in that agreement, especially if they see that the good has gone through another country or through Freeport in transit to New Zealand. What could they ask for? It's hard to say exactly, but they could ask for one or more of the following. These are just indicative examples. They shouldn't be taken as gospel, but they might ask might ask for a certificate as you have suggested, a certificate of non-manipulation issued by the customs authority of the country of transit. So, for example, if the good has gone through Australia on the way to New Zealand, they might ask for a non-manipulation certificate from Australia. That gives an exact description of the goods. It might state the dates and unloading and reloading of the goods, and where applicable, the names of the ships or the other means of transport that have been used, and finally certifying the conditions in which the goods remained in the transit country. So you may remember I said that the goods couldn't be released in free circulation. That final point speaks to that. How was it that the goods remained under customs control and were not released into free circulation? So I know that I mentioned a certificate of non-manipulation there, but it's not like a requirement in the New Zealand agreement itself. It's just that you may be asked for one. However, they may also ask you to provide some other form of proof. They might ask you for contractual transport documents. For example, that could be bills of lading. They might ask for factual, concrete evidence based on the marking or numbering of packages, any evidence that relates to the good itself, and possibly any substantiating documents to the satisfaction of the customs authorities of the importing country. So it's not very helpful, I'm afraid, whoever asked this question, to say they could ask for a number of things in this specific instance, but it is true. So if you are planning to send your goods through to New Zealand and there's going to be some points of transit, just basically make sure you're as prepared as possible, is what I would say. Yeah, I hope that answers the question sufficiently for that person there. Just scanning the other questions.
I think that's really interesting, and the fact that I don't think you can stress it enough. Each FTA is different, and the fact that one FTA states something doesn't mean that all other FTAs will. It definitely caught me out a few times. I think what's interesting is the last question. I think it's worth talking very briefly, and more generically, if preference is available, do we have to claim it? I mean, at import, for example, because I think that's what the question is saying. We all agree that the answer is no, you don't have to claim preference if you don't want to. If you want to pay the full rate of duty, I'm pretty sure that HMRC will be very happy with that. And they will not come and ask you why. There might be very genuine reasons. I think one of them could be that you don't have sufficient documentation to substantiate that claim. So as an importer, you might choose not to do it. But what's your suggestion if there are two tariffs and one is preferential 0% and the other one is 0% anyway? Because we see that from time to time.
I would say it's entirely upon the discretion of the trader to decide what it is they want to do there, basically. There may be different reasons why a trader decides not to apply for preference. I think the person who asked this question has suggested that the certification procedures are burdensome. Of course, there's administrative costs into going into that. They may decide that the tariff preference rate that they may get does not justify that admin. That's down to the trader to decide what they want to do.
Absolutely. And Paul, you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree with what Dan just said. The only reason you might want to claim preference is if you know you're going to incorporate those goods into something that's then going to be exported. So you might want evidence that the goods are of a certain origin and qualified, and then you aren't going to unship them. If they're then incorporated in something else, it would be useful to have that evidence that the goods are of a specific origin when they come in. One of the other, I'll jump in because I've seen some of the questions. Something that seems to be cropping up is the fact that at the moment, for most of the trade agreements that were rolled over, you can accumulate EU origin goods. But a lot of the trade agreements, and again, I'm going to have to be boring and say it's specific to each trade agreement, a lot of these rollovers are now expiring. So you need to check back to the government website for the UK trade agreements and see if the agreement's being renegotiated, because a lot of them had a 3-year limit on the EU accumulation of goods on those rolled over contracts. We're getting closer to that date now. So if you've been currently relying on accumulation of EU goods into your UK trade agreement, that may be coming to an end. I'm thinking particularly of the Canadian agreement, which I know is being renegotiated at the moment, though I think it's just been agreed for the Vietnam agreement that it's going to continue. So as we said, it's all down to the individual agreement.
And I just wanted to add one thing, Paul, if I may. On the very last question, there is a reference to the fact that the agent is claiming preference. From my point of view, if I put my ChamberCustoms hat on, unless you have indirect representation, the trader should be the one making the decision, not the agent. The trader decides whether they want to claim preference or not, and the trader has to provide the evidence that Dan, Gavin, and Paul have been talking about, not the agent. So if you are that trader and your agent is making decisions for you, have a chat to them. They shouldn't be doing that. So I think we've covered all the questions. I mean, you guys have, oh, Dan, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to have a quick note that it is hard for us to answer specific questions on individual trade agreements. And I know that we keep directing people to check those agreements themselves, but I think something that might be helpful in terms of what to look out for when you're looking to accumulate goods from a particular country. So whether it's the EU or another country, Canada, Tunisia, wherever, and we have an FTA with them and you want to accumulate goods from that country, something that you might want to look out for, which might appear in those trade agreements, are articles that specify insufficient production, which basically means that like you cannot accumulate a good if you haven't done anything that goes beyond those a specified list of activities. So basically you have to do some kind of working to that good to be able to accumulate it. And if you haven't done that, then it counts as insufficient production, basically. I can't remember any FTAs off my head, which I want to refer you to, but basically it's something to look out for when you're looking to accumulate goods, to make sure that you're not caught in this trap. And then that later on, if you get preference rejected and you think, hey, but I wanted to accumulate these products, and you realize that you haven't done enough to accumulate them. Gavin, is there anything else you want to add to that point? I thought about it quite late in the day.
Yeah, Dan, it's a really good point. I think on insufficient processing, for goods to be accumulated, I know in most of our FTAs, the general rule is for goods, if you want to accumulate goods, those goods will need to be processed beyond what is listed as insufficient processing. So there's this difference between when the good meets a PSR, that is sufficient processing. But for goods to be accumulated, they only need to go beyond what is insufficient processing. So examples of insufficient processing would be something like bottling, I believe, and just kind of processes that are designed to keep products in kind of good condition, as well as not processing it beyond what is sufficient processing in a PSR. And Dan, that's the kind of only clarification I wanted to make on that point. I have seen that there's a quick question at the bottom saying, is there a place that the government are listing RFTs which are up for renegotiation? There is a web page on .gov which lists that, as well as the new FTAs which the UK government are currently negotiating. And if I could quickly answer one more question, is there an expiry date relevant to each FTA? The answer is no. FTAs aren't there isn't an expiry date on the FTA itself. As Paul mentioned, there might be expiry dates on certain clauses, such as extended accumulation. But again, to be boring, we'll need to check the terms of each individual agreement. I'll stop there.
Okay, Emmanuel, quickly, we've been asked, what happens if HMRC decide to do a verification? Well, they will write to you initially, ask you to supply evidence, and then they may actually come out and do an inspection. Normally at the behest of an overseas customs authority, and obviously HMRC can do the same for goods that have come into the UK. They can go back to whichever country the goods came from and ask their customs authority to do a verification as well.
That's great. So we have the last couple of minutes just to wrap up. You can all see the questions. Something has gone wrong in the Q&A panel, but if there is anything else that you would like to answer, Dan, there is one about how far back we have to go.
That's what I was going to speak to now, just conscious that we only have a few minutes left, and Gavin, I might ask you to jump in on this one as well. So basically, what a number of PSRs like RVC and my hand is still up, and change of tariff headings, etc. Basically, what those rules are looking to do is to allow you to have non-originating content up to a certain amount. It's a bit different when you have change of tariff headings or subheadings as opposed to RVC, where RVC you just have meter percentage threshold, whereas a change in tariff heading or subheading or change of chapter, basically any non-originating materials that go into your product that you're exporting, they also need to meet the product specific rule of that agreement when you're incorporating them into your product in order for them to count as originating. I appreciate that sounds a bit confusing, but let's say that we have a product, well, the agricultural sprayer actually works here because one of the product specific rules that are used there alongside the RVC 40 rule is change of tariff subheading. I think I remember from my slides, which basically means that any non-originating material that goes into that product will use parts, just because we use it then. It basically needs to change tariff subheading before it is incorporated into the agricultural sprayer and counts as originating. If you got non-originating parts from America and you put them into the agricultural sprayer and exporting it to New Zealand, and you haven't transformed them, then basically your good is not going to get preference because the non-originating materials haven't changed tariff subheading. So conscious that, and this is a bit of a roundabout answer, but basically in terms of how far down your supply chain do you go, you basically need to know, if you're a business and you're making a sprayer or whatever, the parts that you've got, have those individual parts met this product specific rule for those parts in the FTA that you're seeking to use. So you may have the finalized product that you're looking to export. You may have your sprayer or coffee machine or car, whatever. You need to meet that rule in order to access preference. But basically, you need to make sure that the materials that are going into that product, the parts or widgets, whatever it is, those will have product specific rules in that agreement as well. So if you have a car, for example, you have a steering wheel, or you may have materials, and you need to basically look at those materials and the product specific rules and think, are these meeting the product specific rules here? If you have an RVC, it's a bit easier because you can be like, okay, it's no problem. This doesn't meet the RVC, doesn't meet the product specific rule, but I can still have it in my product, which I'm exporting as a non-originating material. That doesn't work for change of tariff heading rules or subheading rules. You need to make sure in those instances that you are doing enough to change the product and turn it into something else before you incorporate into your finished product. So all this to say is you don't need to go down the rabbit hole and go to like your suppliers. You basically need to know whether the inputs that you have are originating at the point that you have got them. So the final supplier that you're looking at, if your supplier is giving you some parts and you see whether they're originating or not, that is all you need to know basically at that point. When you put them into your product, are they originating or not? I hope that makes sense. Gavin, is there anything you want to add to that to clarify?
No, Dan, that was a great explanation. I think it is also worth just keeping a hold of any suppliers' declarations that you have. So if you get asked, is this good originating that I'm using as an input for the product that I'm making, is that input originating? You have proof to say that it is. I think it's definitely worth keeping a hold of that information.
Yes, and in fact, if you are accessing preference under different trade agreements, there is a requirement for you to keep records up to a certain amount of time of the goods that you're exporting, the materials going into that relating to preference for a certain amount of time. In New Zealand, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. I think it's 3 or 4 years, but you will need to check to confirm, and it will be slightly different in other trade agreements as well. So that's also something you don't want to be caught out by in case, as Emmanuel or Paul has said earlier, HMRC decide to do a verification, because you don't want to turn around and say, I can't give you anything, I got rid of it a year ago. That was one of the conditions that you're supposed to abide by you accessing preference under the agreement. So be warned and don't be caught out by that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that's all we have time for. So first of all, a big thank you to Gavin and Dan from DBT and to Paul from PCC. It's great, very informative. We will be sharing a link for the recording and for the presentation that you shared. And of course, people can just contact us through the normal channels for questions and follow up. So thank you very much for taking part, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.